agenda is really going to be one, how we're going to explore Synchrony's data automation with our unique hub and spoke model. Really, it's going to focus on how do you simplify a multi-CRM environment. We'll talk about how companies of any size find themselves in a multi-CRM environment. We'll talk a couple success stories of some global enterprises that have smoothly combined a number of CRMs in different applications to streamline efficiencies, to get on the same page data-wise. And then finally, Jackie is going to lead us through a live demo, walk how this actually might work in practice. The main part of the story of why this stuff happens, when I say this stuff, this data chaos that we all experience, this can happen when you've got a single CRM, but we see it really compound when you have many CRMs, either as a result of acquisitions largely. I think that's one of the primary places we find it. And oftentimes just more mature global organizations have many different CRMs for regions, and they are all in very different states of repair or disrepair. The problem that we experience, right, even if you're running best of breed, like you're running on a single platform with a single type of CRM, et cetera, it seems like they should all work together. The problem really is how these systems have been designed forever, right? Which is out-of-the-box connectors. I connect my CRM to whatever application you might care about, but connecting multiple kinds of the same things results in a lot of problems. And as we grow, we add new CRMs, we buy new companies. Moreover, as we buy companies, oftentimes they don't just happen with you're not just buying a company or organization with a CRM, you're also buying other applications. But we start to think about addressing this complexity by either coding some custom script or having a different kind of iPass or workflow tool that can connect all these different applications and pass data ultimately from one place to another, right? And so the problems really start to kick in when you have, let's say, 2 CRMs, right? 3, 4, 5. How can you tell what's happening in these other systems? Can you do a roll-up? Can you augment with the missing data? Can you get a snowflake table, not only just summarized into an object in Salesforce, but also maybe in many Salesforces at the same time, if you are working across the same client in different geos? How can you do routing? How can you do reporting? How can you sell and do upsells coordinated with different teams? And as I noted, this is just CRM in this scenario, but think about anything that happens when you have your ERPs, your finance systems, your billing systems, your support systems, data warehouses. Native just essentially does not work when you're trying to coordinate more than 3 systems. And so, this is a kind of a no hand raise here, but if anybody's running more than 3 systems to run their business, obviously even at Synchrony, we run more than 3 systems, and it's difficult to keep that data in line without a system like Synchrony. It's borderline impossible to do it without an army of people and analysts. And if we're SIs or an agencies trying to support our customers to deliver these kinds of projects and manage expectations correctly. So Synchrony, our approach, and we're a relatively new company. Some of you have known us for a long time. Some of us, I think, are just getting to know us, but we have a unique hub and spoke architecture. Synchrony leverages a powerful hub and spoke system to streamline data integration challenges, and imagine that we can consolidate data from any of these applications that we talked about, any systems that is a record. In fact, I know that we use CRM as the catch-all, but think about any application that is a quote-unquote system of record. I talked about finance, I talked about data warehouses, but think about anything that you do, your prospecting engine, I talked about billing, I talked about accounts receivable. All these systems need to be sharing data pretty much in real time if we're going to deliver excellent customer experiences, make strong data-driven decisions, and align with our peers in different areas and different regions and different businesses. So with this hub and spoke, you can essentially apply data governance. Data flows seamlessly from the hub, where it is governed and standardized into something that's really that's usable across all these applications in the same format. And this, as I mentioned earlier, simplifies communications between data sources, simplifies communications between your teams, and allows, this is very important, easy integration of new tools as you grow. You would decide to add a new CRM intentionally. That's relatively easy once you have this data model, this data model standardized, and you know what an account means, what a contact means, and how the data is going to be presented, regardless of what business unit or what geo you're in. This is the old way how it might look. I think that we're all kind of experienced with a little bit like this. We usually diagram something probably a little tidier than this of how our data flows. This is where we take customers to. It's centralized, distributed access, democratized, and everybody will understand what things mean. This creates efficiency, reduced costs. This reduces a lot of point solutions that people are using, trying to build in this kind of spaghetti architecture, and standardize on a central place. And I think also, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of us on this call that are working on these projects for our customers. You know, we might be contractors, we might be systems integrators. Creating a predictable way that you can do this, manage expectations clearly, and deliver on a timeline that people can understand is achievable through this hub and spoke model. This has also been designed, you know, this is a largely a codeless platform. There is code access that you can do to run queries on the data and to create connections to different systems via either Python scripts or SQL queries if this is the language that you'd like to speak in. But this is a plane that both operators and IT folks can collaborate on at the same time. I want to talk about two different case studies. The first flavor that we find is modernization, which happens a lot. This is a Synchrony customer that had a lot of legacy applications, business decisions that have accumulated over 20 plus years. And they have a lot of different systems of record that were not communicating with one another. And so, you know, objectives that they wanted to do, manage pricing in different areas. Each CRM was in a various different state of cleanliness. I think hopefully everybody will understand what I mean by that when each department is left to its own devices in terms of what a standard is for governance and cleanliness. They were hoping to find some way that they could actually get the data dictionary that they cared about standardized, decide how data was going to be formatted in those important objects and fields of record, and then share them across everything. And this was going to unlock planning for them. This is going to unlock territory planning. This is going to unlock routing cross department and cross geo, and for new leads, for new existing accounts, and for unlocking cross sell. So if there was somebody who was a customer in an acquired company, but the parent company did not know about that, now that data can be shared and sales teams can collaborate a little bit more on the same plane. This was led by operations. This project was begun by operations as a business need. IT was brought in and actually ended up owning the project. But again, this is a plane that both teams could collaborate on easily, instead of speaking their own languages in different departments. They could collaborate on this at the same place. The second case study I want to talk about is the first one was modernization, as I mentioned. This is a little bit more of a mergers and acquisitions. You know, in the last 3 years, this particular company had made 4 pretty good size acquisitions. And an acquisition can be, you know, if you're acquiring a smaller company, some of the data is not real meaningful. It's easy to pull that stuff into your core CRM, do an import, maybe do a scrub on it, and then disconnect the old CRM. Right, so that's not real meaningful. But like if you've got a large organization that you've just purchased and is now part of the parent company, you do need to share. In some cases, keep those you know, if it's a large sales and support and marketing team, they need their own systems because that's how their operations work. And so some cases those acquisitions stick around for years. In some cases, they have a remit to get everything ported over relatively quickly. But if the idea in both scenarios are attractive for a hub and spoke scenario like Synchrony, connecting all these different systems, the data would then be unified, cleaned, and then synced out to all sources and destinations in this particular case. Once it was done, the data matches in every different system. So roll-ups work, reports work, A couple of the acquired CRMs were then discontinued, and a couple of them were intentionally left because of the different ways that operations were set up in these different CRMs and teams had operated in them. What was also interesting about this is that there was a couple of things that were non-standard. So in this case, this company was largely running Salesforce. They did have a CRM that was non-Salesforce, and so keeping that in sync was a task that was going to be borderline impossible. It was just going to have to be a lot of manual work, uploads, exports to keep any of those data sets in sync, and they were able to achieve that via synchronous hub and spoke architecture.
So what I'm sharing here is a version of Syncri designed to talk about some of the scenarios and use cases we've been mentioning so far. I'm going to keep things focused around, 3 CRMs, but I hope by the end we're starting to talk about how we expand into that entire positioning and play field, whether it's warehouses, ERPs, marketing platforms, etc. All of the data in these different systems is valuable. And when you do acquisitions, when you have large global organizations, these sorts of systems can become uncontrollable and hard to manage and really understand what's happening. Like Scott was mentioning earlier, if you take a global organization, right, where you might have 3 different Salesforces, you might have some finance tools or other CRMs of different types. Historically speaking, integrating these data require large teams of data architects and engineers focused solely on this task, and that gets expensive. And of course, as the scope changes, it becomes difficult to see what processes were already in place. It becomes even more difficult when you have these various types of tools and you have to procure all sorts of middleware software to integrate them one off. If you take the 5-ish systems I have on the screen here, to get a full data set in any other type of situation, you'd be looking at well over 20 connections to maintain. And that, of course, starts to balloon as you become a global organization with potentially 10 or more CRMs and other softwares to manage. And so out of the gate here, what I want to articulate is connecting systems doesn't require any developer knowledge. If I want to connect a new system, all I have to do is search it in our library on the right here, drag it onto the screen, and go through an authentication process, which we provide guides for to make it as easy as possible to connect to this tool. Once you've authenticated into all of your systems that you care about, right, we start to build some data catalog features right on top of this directly. What I've done is I've double-clicked on one of my systems and I've navigated to our Schema Studio, where we can see the data model that belongs to this specific instance of Salesforce. For every system you connect, you're going to be able to see the full schema of that tool, meaning all of the objects, both custom and native, all the fields, both custom and native, that belong to that tool, to allow you to start building relationships and understand the data that's accessible. If you, for instance, run your organization out of the US and you have a EU Salesforce or Salesforces or CRMs in other regions, those data models probably aren't 100% the same. And so trying to map those together can become difficult. You can start to understand exactly what's happening with your data, all within Syncri, without needing to go to multiple different locations. And you can actually export this and view this in whichever format makes the most sense. Now, once you understand that data model, you can come into what we've called our Sync Studio and start to author your data strategy. Much like everything else in Syncri so far, it hasn't required any developer experience or deep knowledge of code to actually start and turn this problem into something that's manageable. As you can see, there's a circle. It's defaulted of our model out of the box, but this is also extendable. You can include whatever you need to build this centralized model within Syncri. I'll go into my multi-Salesforce account here and take a look at an actual pipeline that takes our 3 Salesforces and puts them together. Now, when you're actually starting to bring this data together centrally, you've probably spent a lot of time trying to determine a strategy and a process to do this, and it's been overwhelming. The next step is figuring out how to actually make it happen, and that's a whole nother problem and a half. Now, when you're within Syncri, all you have to do is define the systems you care about that we've already done and start to build our mapping logic, which we can again do in a codeless way to start bringing our data together. If we want to map data into the Synchrony centralized model, all you do is choose the system you care about. I'll choose my Salesforce, my account object, since that's what I'm working off of here, and the fields that I care about. I can start to map this into the Synchrony system. I can choose the directionality of this data, whether it's bidirectional or one way, and then map it into our centralized model. And if something in the Synchrony model doesn't actually fit what's in your external system, you can extend that model directly from this view without needing to navigate anywhere else. You can do this for all your systems until you've built your central model that's starting to be put in place to bring your data together. Now, it doesn't stop there at just mapping and bringing your systems in. The next step is to start to decide processes, start to build logic engines, governance rules on top of your data to ultimately end up with a distributed truth at the center that can be shared with all of your different instances at the end of the day. So as you can see, there's something more than Salesforce here. I'm extracting the domain on some information within my pipelines. The reason I'm doing this is I'm setting a primary key to globally merge and dedupe my data set here. If I double click on this Synchrony node in the center, it pulls me into our merge studio. From here, we can decide our rules and logics to find duplicates and merge these data across our different sources. Now, in a lot of cases, you'll have primary keys, whether it's a unique identifier you have internally, but it's not always the case. And sometimes you need to build composite keys to do so. And you can take your composite key and make it up of whatever logic engine makes the most sense for your business to start and decide how this data gets brought together. This can go as far down and as deep as you need to ensure that you have the correct matching criteria for bringing this data together. Once you've done that, you can set which one becomes the new master record on top of this, and ultimately start to build policies to govern when this data gets merged. For instance, if our Salesforce 1 becomes the master record, but it's got 10 fields that are blank that are populated in one of our losing records, we can put policies in place here to ensure that that data from the losing records gets brought up onto the new master. At the end of the day, it's not just about having the most up-to-date or the most managed record, but also making sure it's the most complete based off the rules that you define. Now, we've been operating largely on the object level here, but we can also set individual policies to govern and control our data at an individual field level. Whether you want to put rules on individual systems, individual processes for different field values, or governing the data on singular locations down to every single field to achieve a goal of having the best model that is entirely governed and controlled by you. Now, once you've configured these steps, just in a few minutes, assuming you've started to build these processes out, you can have data start syncing between your different systems. This is a fully working pipeline that allows data to move and be unified between 3 different Salesforces. All the steps have been included here to do this, and it only took us a few minutes to actually start putting this together. Now, the question you might be thinking is, hey, Jack, I think this is great for 3 systems, but what happens if I have more? I simply can't manage tackling, bringing together 10, 15, 20 different tools. Well, that's what's great about Synchrony is it meets you where you are in your data journey. You can start these processes with as many systems or as little systems as you need to start getting the logic together. And then at any point, you can come configure a new CRM, a new ERP system, or whatever you like that fits into this model and bring it into our flow. We can put the same rules and logic right directly on top of it here, connect it into our flow. And as long as we've decided the objects and the mapping coming from that system the same way we did before, it'll follow all the rules and processes that you've already defined to give you the best data set for each object, for each entity, for each system, the way that you care about. Now, there's certainly more that Synchrony can do, whether it's building an audit layer, viewing a transaction history of the data, seeing how it's changing over time, or building dashboards directly on the data in flight. But if you want to talk about that, Scott and myself and the rest of the team are more than willing to talk to you about that offline in another call, maybe we can talk about yours problem specifically.